A few years back, I was with a group of leaders and we were talking about change and discussing specifically like what makes it easier or harder to handle a given change. Everyone in the group agreed that the key is the ability to have some say in a change or some control in it along the way. And if you couldn't have say or control, then at least you needed clear information so that you could understand and have a sense of what was shifting and how. 1 year ago, as the change of the pandemic and all of its implications hit our community, we had basically neither of these, no control and no understanding. And so I think it would have been reasonable to have expected that all of us would react very badly. We would anxiously project our worries and desire for control on each other. I'm sure we did some of this. But for the large part, what I witnessed in this community was a deep willingness to learn, to be curious, to care for each other, and to be generous in this care. Care for one another and for our wider community. And as Eleanor and Lauren just described with such beauty, what I witnessed was our ability to adapt. Adaptation is a complex biological process in that it is different than most of what humans tend to think of as growth. See, because it's not linear, it doesn't have a plan. No one thing is in control or have all the information, which doesn't mean that it doesn't have intelligence. Instead, adaptation depends on each living organism using its own intelligence, its piece of the truth, and then its sensing of its environment, that is the presence of every other living thing and its realities, to sense that and to notice it, to take it in, and then to choose actively how to respond. We have often overemphasized the first bit of this adaptive process, that is that individual intelligence, and we have less fully understood the second part, which is the taking in and the sensing and the choice of how we will respond. We imagine that adaptation is about individual will and stubborn strength, or maybe talent and luck. But as Margaret Wheatley teaches, independence is not a concept that explains the living world. It is only a political concept that we've invented. Individuals cannot survive alone. They move out continuously to discover what relationships they require, what relationships are possible. And evolution progresses from these new relationships, not the harsh and lonely dynamics of survival of the fittest. Species that decide to ignore relationships, that act in greedy ways, simply die off. If we look at the evolutionary record, it is cooperation that increases over time. When we were thinking about what helps us deal with change, we forgot to think about this critical factor. That is the factor that I believe made all the difference for us in this big change where we had no control and very little information. That is our ability to turn towards rather than away from each other and to work together in cooperation and care. As just one example from our year, so many people struggled across the country, really, to navigate the new technology early on, which of course is about the technology, but it can be a really emotionally charged experience, feeling like you can't access everything that everyone else can, and that maybe that doesn't matter to anyone but you. But here in our community, so many of you reached out actively and intentionally, walked others of you through Zoom or set up a Roku. A whole volunteer tech team emerged to offer trainings and to serve as part of the volunteers that Jen described. Beyond just tech, hundreds of calls were made by circle leaders and our caring network. I just need to say it again. Hundreds of calls were made to make sure that no one was alone or without resources, and to make sure that each person, however loosely connected they may have been, knew that they had a community to turn to, even when we were physically apart. This network of tough, resilient love allowed us all to adapt and to grow and to keep growing. Of course, inevitably, some of the adaptations that we've made together or individually have been maladaptive. That is a matter of survival rather than what Adrienne Maree Brown calls intentional adaptation. Some of us have found ourselves adapting in ways we really don't feel all that good about. And in some cases, the relationships and the cooperation, it wasn't fully there. It wasn't enough. We have to acknowledge that these are part of the truth of this year too. What we experienced a year ago was traumatic, and it is a miracle that we responded as we did and survived as we have. And so now, as we emerge with just a little more information, a little more agency, as we begin to move into the after times, our task is to be here now as we are and to keep adapting. That is not to some past versions of who we were or the reality from some other time, but to who we actually are now and to this time and this moment. Our individual lives and our collective life has been profoundly changed in response to this change. And there is no going back. There is only the tough love of adaptation. And so let us keep turning towards one another and discover who we will become and how we will grow next.